Hello, today I'd like to think about power and the exercise of power and how this is presented in the Bible, and specifically to look at the work of Paul Beauchamp and his study of the first chapter of Genesis. Paul Beauchamp was a French theologian. He was concerned with how biblical texts were structured and how that structure served to convey their meaning. When he analysed the first chapter of the book of Genesis, Beauchamp found 10 instances where God speaks to bring his creation into being, or to order his creation. What Beauchamp called 10 creative words. The first 5 creative words relate to the inanimate world, the world of rocks and mountains, of oceans and rivers, and also of vegetation, of forests and grasslands. And the climax of this section is the establishment of the dominion of the sun and the moon. The sun is to rule over the day, and the moon to rule over the night. The next 5 creative words relate to the animate world and the creation of animate life in the ocean and above the ocean, and the creatures that live on the land. And the climax of this section is the creation of human beings in God's image or God's likeness, who are to rule over the animate world, just as the sun and moon are to rule over the inanimate world. And God looks over everything he has made and declares it to be very good. Paul Beauchamp makes the point that Genesis 1 is structured to make exactly this point, that human beings have a domain, a dominion, over which they are to rule as God's representatives. In chapter 2 of Genesis, we begin to see what kind of rule is intended here. Here the creation is characterized as a garden, the Garden of Eden, which human beings are to tend and to keep. I recall a story from many years ago from Australia. A number of species were becoming extinct, and the zoologists and botanists and ecologists couldn't work out why this was happening. So finally they asked the indigenous people of Australia, and they said, it's because no one is looking after the land. In the Garden of Eden, the primal human beings are naked and unashamed. Their only imperative is to be fruitful and multiply. Nothing is forbidden to them except one thing, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They may not eat this fruit because they will die if they do so. Now at this point we are introduced to another entity that is present in the Garden of Eden, an enigmatic and ambiguous figure, personified here as a serpent, much more explicitly described in the very last book of the Bible as that old serpent and Satan, which can be translated variously as adversary or enemy or accuser. In this instance, Satan tempts Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Immediately their consciousness is altered. They are consumed with shame, particularly body shame. They cover themselves and withdraw from the presence of God, fearful of being seen by their Creator. And now, separated from God and bound with shame, human beings can be controlled and manipulated by this spiritual adversary. And what does this adversary ultimately want? Well, he or it ultimately wants control of the domain that rightly belongs to human beings. And how far does he get with this project? Fast forward again through time, we find Jesus on top of a mountain being tempted by Satan. In Matthew chapter 4 we read, again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them. And he said to him, all these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. Then Jesus said to him, begone, Satan, For it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. So Jesus refuses to receive all the kingdoms of the world from Satan's hand. He doesn't grasp power like Satan does. Rather, he surrenders power. And in the book of Philippians we read, Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name. So is there something counterfeit in Satan's offer to Jesus of all the kingdoms of the world? Is it really in Satan's hand to give? Especially when we consider that Jesus ultimately receives this supreme authority from God's hand. So is the world, in some sense, disputed territory? What's really going on here? And that's something that we'll consider in the next video.